All right, welcome to Tales for Bookeemonsters. We are doing an advent calendar, cozy mystery, bedtime read aloud of a book called Christmas at Glitter Peak Lodge. It is a cozy mystery in translation from Norwegian by Kjersti Herland Johnsen, if I remember the middle name correctly. And being the 19th of December, we are reading chapter 19. Things are getting very interesting in this book. Things are being revealed. Exactly what is going to happen tonight. Christina, hello! It's been so long. Hanging out, lurking again, almost got up. Awesome. All right, so what I'll be doing here is I'll be popping out of the stage here, so all you'll see is the ambiance, and I'll read chapter 19. And at the end, I will say goodnight, and we will do chapter 20 tomorrow. Isn't that amazing? All right, so I'm going to pop off here. Thank you guys for listening. And here we go. December 19. Safe travels, Preben, Ingrid said, putting a hand on his arm. Let's talk soon. Let's do that, Ingrid. She waved as he drove off. He smiled and waved back. She watched as his car drove down the freshly plowed road. Her heart felt strange. These past 2 days had changed so much. She hadn't even considered the possibility that she and Preben could reconcile. The pain and fear had been too deep, the panic that took over when he came so strong. But now, just over 24 hours later, they were here. The surprise of Preben's proposal had begun to thaw her negative feelings, and their collaboration in rescuing Hussein from the mountain had swept away the last barriers like a sudden spring flood. Things with Preben were different from anyone else she'd ever been with. There was an intense power in everything he did, and from the first time he set his green eyes on her like that, she'd known what it meant. Preben wanted her then. There was no mistaking that, and Preben usually got what he wanted. But now, did he still want her? And if so, what did she want? At best, being with Preben was an adventure. He and Ingrid were like two force fields. They magnified each other's strong sides, and she often felt almost unbeatable with him. They'd made such an incredible team. Both their achievements and their relationship were thoroughly covered by the press. There was a kind of glow around them, and expedition participants and sponsors alike had lined up to be part of their team. But they also had the same weaknesses. They were stubborn and willful, and neither of them was a particularly good listener, either to other people's opinions or to their own feelings. Both were practical and natural leaders. This made it difficult when they found themselves in a stressful situation, and both believed they were right. When they argued, there were wild storms with lightning and thunder, followed by long, frosty periods of cold. To be seen by Preben was to be warmed by the sun, but when he chose to ignore you, you were left in the shadows, and it was very cold there. You could say they had their ups and downs, both literally and figuratively. Ha! She grimaced at her own pun. But how could she now be so sure it was totally over? If Preben wanted them to try again, would she be able to resist his power? She didn't have the chance to call Vigard until late in the afternoon. She told him about what had happened, visits and rescues and drama on all fronts, interrupted only by her friend's outburst. I can't believe you climbed again. I knew it, Ingrid. I knew you could do it. She didn't know what to say. It was as if it were only now that she realized what a big deal this was. She defied the white dragon. When it was really necessary, she did what had to be done. But she didn't have much time to get lost in her own thoughts. Vigard kept talking enthusiastically. And it's crazy that Preben Wexelson showed up at your door just like that. It's like a soap opera, he laughed. But what about Thor? Thor? Yeah, how did he react to Preben being there? What was she supposed to say to that? Well, he wasn't thrilled. No, I can believe that, Vigard chuckled. Fortunately, she'd managed to stop Thor from leaving right away yesterday. His anger had subsided a little when she told him about the drama with Hussein, but he still said he'd only come to see whether everything was okay and that he was going back down to the village. So, on a personal level, things were still unresolved. What were his thoughts on the situation now? She still cringed at the thought of him coming in to find her holding Preben's hand, and now she didn't quite know how they should pick up the conversation. She tried to chuckle too, but the laugh seemed to get stuck in her throat. I leave the hotel for a few days, and you manage to get yourself into a love triangle and a dramatic rescue, Vigard said. It's nuts. Love triangle? No, Preben and I ended things a long time ago. And Thor, yes, Thor, he's totally infatuated with you, and you like him too. You just can't see it because you already friend-zoned him. Well, if only you knew that I had just kissed Thor when Preben got here the other day, she thought, because she'd omitted that particular detail in her conversation with Vigard. She got the feeling that he had a hunch about it anyway. I'm still pretty shaky after what happened with Hussein, she said, and relieved, and happy, and totally confused. Good thing the owl and I are coming up tomorrow then. You clearly need someone to look after you. Now it was Ingrid's turn to laugh. And what are you and David going to do then? Chaperone me? Or belay me in the mountains? Vigard chuckled, but then he grew serious. Ingrid, you know I'm more than happy to help and support you however I can. You were a mess after the accident. I'm not going to let you get down like that ever again. I won't let myself, Vigard. I promise to tell you if I need help. Good. When do you think you'll get here, by the way? I think around 7, Vigard said, or I guess it depends on when David's done at work. Maybe 8 is more realistic. She made a mental note that they wouldn't be there until 9 at the earliest. But hey, Vigard said, you mentioned that Thor brought over some old newspapers. Did you find anything out? Yeah, it's all really strange, Ingrid said. She gave Vigard as brief a summary as she could, both of what they'd read and what the old editor had told Thor. The sister of the village big shot, gone without a trace. It's just as I said. It should be a podcast, Vigard said, or a TV series. This is a real mystery. Yeah, it really is, Ingrid said, but there's more. Even more? Vigard asked. Yeah, Thor also found out that Hallgrim Dalen has an economic interest in having the hotel do poorly. But the main point is that I'm becoming more and more certain that there's a connection between the old case and all the things that have been happening around here. What are you thinking of? Well, first and foremost, the sudden cancellations, Ingrid explained, which Hallgrim and the gang seem to be behind. But Nana Borghild says it's not just about the money, that there's history between her and Hallgrim that... Okay, it's pretty complicated. It seems like he blames her for his sister's disappearance. I don't really understand how this is all connected. We'll have to talk about it more when you're here. Vigard grunted triumphantly. You see? True crime. Maybe the murderer from back in the day is threatening to strike again? But we don't even know whether the girl was murdered, Ingrid objected. Then she fell silent. Murder, suicide, accident, a disappearance with a completely different explanation. What did she really know about any of it? Only what was in the newspapers and what Nana Borghild had told her, and that wasn't much. She sighed. Right now, I don't really know what to make of anything, what with all the drama that's been going on here the past few days. Hope you're doing okay, Vigard said before they hung up. See you tomorrow. Ingrid sat there for a while thinking. Was she okay? She didn't know. She was exhausted, overwhelmed, happy, terrified, totally confused, and quite possibly falling in love. Freya Wilkins was almost unrecognizable. The normally adventurous and colorful woman seemed to have faded somehow. She was reclining on the sofa in a gray sweater with a gray wool blanket draped over her legs. Her eyes were half open, and she didn't seem to even be registering the spectacular view of the mountains. Her hair was unkempt and revealed some gray roots at the base of her otherwise blonde locks. A teacup with a bag still in it was on the table in front of her. The tea was so dark that it looked as though it had been steeping for hours. "Hi, Freya. How are you feeling?" Ingrid asked. "I brought some samples from Maja's Christmas baking." She set the tray on the coffee table, even though she got the feeling the treats wouldn't be touched. She sat down in the chair at the end of the table. Dr. Wilkins had opened the door when Ingrid knocked, and was now sitting at the small desk facing the wall. He swiveled in his chair around so that his back was to the desk and many papers strewn across it. His doctor's bag was open next to the sofa. "Thank you," Freya said, smiling weakly. She looked at Ingrid and the baked goods, but then her eyes fell again, as if the effort of uttering those two words had been just too much for her. Was this really the same person who'd burst into the hotel with the energy of a tornado only a few days ago? "Maja sends her best and says she hopes you'll be ready to join her in the kitchen again soon," Ingrid said. "There are all kinds of specialties being prepared now just before Christmas. And there's homebrewed beer that needs tasting," she said with a smile at Dr. Wilkins. "It's an important tradition." The invitation from Maja was a lie, of course. The chef had more than enough on her plate without Freya Wilkins getting in her way. She was at her wits' end with the Americans' constant fussing and helping. But Ingrid hoped that the prospect of some traditional Norwegian activities might rekindle Freya's joie de vivre. It didn't seem to help at all, though. Ingrid looked at the sofa again, where Freya now had her eyes fully closed. Ingrid wasn't sure whether Freya was asleep. Was she drugged or just exhausted? If so, from what? "Freya is very tired," Dr. Wilkins said. He got up from his chair and sat down next to Ingrid. The journey from the U.S., all the organizing, and the high-level activity here in Norway has probably been a bit too much for her. Not good for her blood pressure and quite exhausting mentally as well. He lowered his voice almost to a whisper. "You know, she's had such high expectations for this trip. She spent months, well, years actually, planning it, getting help from all her contacts in Daughters of Norway, searching online day after day for tickets and local information. And she's been so excited about what we might find here in terms of her roots. Maybe even some relatives. But then she found more than she expected." "More? What do you mean?" Dr. Wilkins looked at his wife. "I'm sure she'll be able to tell us more herself when she gets her strength back." Ingrid looked at Freya, who was still lying there with her eyes closed. "Well, I really hope she gets better soon," Ingrid said, "and I trust you'll let us know if there's anything the hotel can help with. Food or transportation or picking up medication from the pharmacy, anything you need." John Wilkins nodded. "Thank you," he said. "You're already doing more than anyone could ask for, but I promise I'll let you know." Just as Ingrid started getting up from her chair, Freya sat up abruptly and fixed her intense gray stare on her. Her eyes were wide open. She leaned forward and grabbed Ingrid's upper arm surprisingly firmly. "It's that picture," Freya said. "I have to look at it again. The picture of my mother." February 1962. Hallgrim's voice sounded like a thunderclap. "Of course you're going to marry Jaron Schmedplas." He leaned forward, shaking his finger in Charlotte's face in time with his words. "You will be happy that someone even wants you at all." "But Hallgrim, I can't. Even though he's your friend, he's too old for me." 29 isn't old. It's old when I'm only 19 and he's been married before. It's not Jaron's fault that his old lady took off. Isn't it? Charlotte stared at her brother in disbelief. So it had nothing to do with the fact that he has a drinking problem and beat her? Hallgrim snorted. You shouldn't listen to rumors. They're not rumors. I know it's true. She moved in with her sister and got a divorce. Nonsense. Gossip. Charlotte started to cry. I'm afraid of him. Hallgrim's face was now red with rage. You ungrateful little. He took a step forward, and for a moment she thought he was going to hit her. Now she was crying so hard she almost couldn't breathe. But he stopped abruptly, stepped back, and took a deep breath. He turned away for a moment and looked back at her, his gaze piercing. Charlotte, it has to be like this. Gerund has agreed. Who else will marry you now, what with the mess you've gotten yourself into? End of chapter 19. We'll do chapter 20 tomorrow. Thank you so much for listening. Have a good night. God bless.